Beau, nice to meet you. How you doing?
It's great to meet you, Daniel. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for getting in touch. Thank you for reaching out and yeah, letting me know that you're out there doing your thing. I hadn't heard of you before or Abundant Minds. I watched. I think it's probably on your Twitter feed somewhere. I found a presentation you gave about Bitcoin. I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, he's one of us.
This is the only group of people that I can really talk to is other people who've gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Anybody else just falls asleep at this point or thinks I'm crazy.
Yeah, well, crazy is as crazy does, right, Lauren? Are they some crystals you have in the background of some sort?
I do. The painting actually is of a water crystal frozen with the frequency of the Earth. So we've got this electromagnetic field around the Earth, and it vibrates at a certain frequency. And I thought it'd be nice to just program people into being in tune with it if they were watching the screen.
Amazing. Well, yeah, we've been falling down a bit of a crystal rabbit hole ourselves recently. That's why I thought it'd be fun to ask you about it when we started recording rather than pre-record. But so yeah, Lauren just held up some amethyst. We've got some. This is our favorite, like the pyrite, uh,
Ooh.
because it looks like a block from the mempool. It looks like things are just falling into place here. And the only
Yeah,
place
is that
find
thing sticking out of it? Is that ordinals that are on the edge of it?
yeah, yeah, that's ocean mining, just kicking them back out. Uh, the only place that I learned that you can find pyrite in this form would be in Spain,
Hmm.
uh, and this is the actual natural formation of it, like almost a perfect block, and it's crazy. But I
What
was
got you guys going down the crystals rabbit hole?
Yep, a little bit. It's fun. We've always got some in our pocket, right, Lauren?
Mine's in my bag, my little
You
bag.
have, yeah.
Always.
What did you have in your bag?
I had the dark green one.
I think that's Bloodstone. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 like an olive green. Yeah, the
Yeah.
kids have always got one or two in their pockets. It's just a fun thing to learn about.
What do you think? Why do you think it's grabbing interest right now?
For us,
People need to chill.
Yeah.
yeah.
Ruth, sister.
The how did we come to this? It was a friend of mine that pulled me down the orgone energy rabbit hole of
Mm.
Wilhelm Reich, and he gifted me an orgonite, which looks like this pyramid. You can get them in all kinds of different shapes and sizes, obviously. And I was like, okay, thanks. That's a nice gift. And he was trying to teach me about piezoelectricity and Tesla and all this kind of stuff that I hadn't really looked into. And then I picked up a few books, and well, this actually, excuse the pun, resonates with me on a certain level here. And I just wanted to keep learning more. And then I read uh, Peter Reich's book. That's Wilhelm's son, who wrote the book, basically telling us the lives of his. It's called something about his dreams, a book full of dreams, and his memories of growing up with his dad, and the science behind the ether and the energy that his father discovered and subsequently was thrown in jail for and had all of his work and lab destroyed. So, of course, I want to learn more about that now. So I get taken down that rabbit hole, and the more you learn, and the more you hear, and the more you see, the more you can't unsee. So it's great to see yourself with that in the background. Where did you come to this kind of rabbit hole yourself?
Uh, it's hard to identify a starting point if we're talking about, well, either rabbit hole, Bitcoin or crystals.
Yeah.
You mentioned piezoelectricity. Uh, I have been to a few meditation retreats with Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he talks a lot about piezoelectricity as it applies to calcite crystals in your pineal gland, so inside of your brain,
Mhm.
and how if you manipulate your cerebrospinal fluid, which flows all the way up and down your spine and into a couple of different compartments in your brain, you can compress that fluid and actually create a little bit of an electrical charge in your brain, compress those calcite crystals in your brain, and that's one way to kind of alter consciousness combined with, breath work and just kind of settling the mind. But it's wild how similar crystals are to living systems in that sense, and how much they're just kind of like refractors of consciousness and of life. So, as much as we say that Bitcoin is holding up a mirror to people and shows you what the world looks like and what you look like, I'd say the same thing with any deeper inquiry into nature and the mind and especially the wonderful world of crystals.
Yeah, and everything has its own resonance, right? We try and learn about that, like this wood is vibrating at a different resonance to the frequency to the stones, and then started learning about electroculture, and that's another really interesting little rabbit hole to go down.
The 5G test.
Oh, then yeah, well, then you get taken into the world of the 5G towers and the non-native EMFs that are being pumped through our skies, through the ionosphere, and the effect that is having on people. And it does have an
Mm.
effect, and it have an effect on people in different ways because everybody is different. But like you were saying, if you have these crystals in your pineal glands and they are catching frequencies from non-native EMFs like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, don't be surprised if people start acting a little bit depressed or edgy or different. Like these, again, I mean, maybe we should be wearing tinfoil hats.
You know,
You
that's
know,
what you would get from just tuning into this and being the start of the conversation. But I'm totally into it. And I currently live in Oregon, which is far less populated, but I used to live in Dallas, Texas. And
Mhm.
Dallas was one of the first places to roll out 5G because it's AT&T's hub. And so I had been living there for 4 or 5 years, and my wife moved there to live with me as well before we were married. And as soon as they turned on the 5G towers in the area, we didn't know it at the time. It was like a few months later that we figured it out. But like to the day that they started turning those on, we both started feeling less healthy, more irritable, had these random symptoms come up. And it was hard to argue that it happened right around the same time that they turned these things on. And of course, we moved to Oregon a couple of years ago, and as soon as we got to a less populated area without so much of that interference, we're both happier, healthier, and I would say smarter than we ever were living in the midst of all that radiation and frequency. It's hard to separate, a living system from the impacts that things like that have.
100%. And I know a lot of people will be rolling their eyes and listening as they're listening, but there's something here. There's no doubt. It's not woo-woo conspiracy stuff. You don't just throw these 5G towers up en masse whilst everybody was on lockdown. That was what was happening across Europe,
Mm.
especially in the UK. Uh, and they're putting them, put them on the schools, right? So everyone kind of like goes back to school. Most people don't even notice. Some people notice. You're like, what's that great big tower thing doing on in a place where you're not even supposed to be using your phone? Like, okay,
Yeah.
just
I, you
question.
know, I think it's totally reasonable to be skeptical, and you should always unpack things and try to get to the root of why and actually understand the mechanics. But I think one of the most foolish things that we can do as people is not trust our own direct experience and allow someone to talk us out of, I mean, really the way you feel. The way you feel impacts so much of how your life is lived and what you're able to produce and create, and how intelligently you show up, how happy you show up. So if something makes you feel like it's harming you, you should maybe listen to that on some level.
What's the thing we can't stand at the moment?
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. Other than a lot,
Uh,
clown world
oh,
is a weird place.
Saturday.
The cloud seeding, yeah, the lines in the sky that are just
Mm,
the geoengineering, the solar radiation modification, Well, if you're loath to say the word chemtrail because then you're cancelled immediately. Like nobody's going to take you seriously. That's a psyop within a psyop right there. But yeah, like you say, I can't help but think when I see with my eyes and my gut tells me that's not normal. Like, why shouldn't I be speaking up about it? If I see something I think there's, clearly a wrongdoing being done here against, like, nobody has consented to having geoengineering being carried out above their heads. So, it has been benign as cloud seeding apparently is. This is what they'll tell you. Oh, silver iodide, bro. It's just silver iodide. They just spray that into the clouds. I've been doing it for decades. Like, are you dumb? You're like, what? Can you hear the words coming out of your mouth? You're down with this?
Just because it's decades doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah, and then have a look at the disasters that keep happening. One in Dubai, one in Valencia. Yeah, exactly. And you can generally link all these things back. It just takes a little bit of research into existing projects. And
Hmm.
yeah, man, wow, this started weird.
We've also been, taking the nutrients out of our food for decades and
Yeah.
taking the value out of our money for decades. And I think it's only after decades of doing these things sometimes that you can see what the effects are.
Mhm.
And, to pivot into the Bitcoin world a little bit and the mining world, that's what we're doing is we're showing what has been going on that most people have accepted as just base reality that they've decided is the way that the world works. And finally, we've got something that holds up a mirror that shows you, hey, just because it's the way that it's worked for as long as most of us have been alive, doesn't mean that it's the only way that it can work, doesn't mean it's the best way that it can work. And to me, that's our mission is coming out and speaking about it, educating about it, and making sure that people have at least, some kind of differing opinion that they can make the decision for themselves. Is it really right the way that everything is working, or do we still have room to improve as humans, as a civilization?
Mhm. Right, Lauren, you were supposed to ask the first question. We spent like 15 minutes talking about crystals and stuff.
Well, now my question is a bit off topic.
Yeah, right.
Can
Bring it back.
you explain Bitcoin mining to me as I am a 13-year-old?
So, Bitcoin mining is just the process of taking energy and turning it into computing power, which then secures the world's best money, which is Bitcoin.
I just dropped something.
Mhm.
Um, so like, how does it work, I guess? Like,
So
is
the way that it works in general is I try to keep this as simple as I can. You take a raw resource like a hydroelectric dam or wind or solar power, and that is energy that'll power a computing source. So a miner in this case, a just really big, dumb, powerful computer that's essentially just guessing random numbers as quickly as it possibly can to try to find this one number that completes the puzzle piece of a Bitcoin block, which is just the set of thousands of transactions for which that number that your machine guessed completes the set of transactions, puts it in the ledger, and then memorializes it for all time and can't be changed thereafter. So we as miners, in a sense, are playing the greatest guessing game with the most energy that we can find in the world.
Makes sense.
so basically a really big puzzle, and you're trying to find the piece, and you finally find it,
Hmm.
kind of like that.
Yeah. Other people have used the analogy of a lottery. So you're just trying to guess this number. So you've got to guess a number between 0.00000000 all the way up to goodness knows how much, right? You're not going to have much chance of finding it. That's why you need these machines to, how many guesses now can they make per second?
Oh, a single machine is making trillions of guesses per second. So
Huh?
the whole network is, I don't know, what is the number? Thousands of trillions, so quadrillions every second. It's crazy. It's crazy big numbers. And The point is that it's harder to fake it than it is to just participate honestly. And that's what makes mining so beautiful is you can't rig the game. It takes more energy to try to rig the game or break the game than to play the game fairly, which is why we all like to participate in the Bitcoin network.
Any further questions?
I don't think I have any more questions now.
No. Cool.
Well, thank you for your time. Yeah, so thank you. Bye bye.
Of course. Thanks, Lauren.
So, Beau, I mean, let's talk about abundant mining or abundant mines, excuse me. What's the company? What do you do? Mine?
Sure. So, on a very surface level, we are a Bitcoin mining co-location host. So we make Bitcoin mining accessible for investors with no extra time. Essentially, all you have to do is pay for a machine, and we handle all the logistics of sourcing it, setting it up, running it, repairing it, and making sure that you get Bitcoin payouts daily. And the longer story is that we're reworking the energy landscape and making sure that energy is abundant for all. But the vehicle for that is making sure that people make money in a passive way.
All right. Okay. So this is kind of interesting. The way that obviously we all come to Bitcoin in a different fashion. Then once we get here, we fork off in different directions. You've clearly chosen mining. Is there a reason for that? Did you come from some kind of engineering, electrical kind of background at all?
Yeah, so my background, my education was engineering management and information systems. So I had a little bit of every kind of engineering. I had some data center coursework, did some, business optimization, systems optimization, and I always knew that I was not a fit to go work for somebody. I was always destined to be an entrepreneur and run my own business. It would have been a very sad state for me and for the person running the company if I were ever to work for someone. But really was drawn to the idea of building lasting wealth. And I chose real estate after college. So built my own real estate company, did some development, did some creative financing deals. And then 2020 came along and forced me to relook at the world again. I had already been exposed to Bitcoin earlier in 2015, but didn't take it on as a full-time endeavor. And then, a few well-placed podcasts with Sailor, and I was fully orange pilled again. Started going down the rabbit hole with Jeff Booth's book, Sovereign Individual, as many of these resources I could get my hands on. And I had a couple early experiences in mining, but wasn't, deeply interested early on. At the time in 2015, there were, the S3s and still very early on in that whole space. I did kind of a managed mining deal in Sweden, went bad within a couple of months, and I got probably half of my money back. And then tried again in 2021 and had a really rough experience with a co-location host. So I had at the time took out the most money that I had ever put into a single deal, about $500,000, and bought machines and sent them to a host in Georgia. They were not hooked up for 6 months. By the time they were hooked up, were half damaged, very poorly managed, and overheating and breaking all the time. And of course, I got the privilege of $30,000 bills just to do diagnostic and repair. So it was a really rough experience.
Um,
But
I want to ask you to say the company
please.
name. Can I guess?
It's not one that most people know, actually.
Really?
It was a single operator. So he was from the traditional data center world and just kind of had mining on the side. Um,
Okay, that's interesting. Very interesting because yeah, the one that I was gonna say, I won't say it, just out of respect, but was very well known, and that was the kind of problem that people were facing and was well documented. Interesting to know that there were individuals doing that as well. I wonder how many were out there doing the same. Do you think he was a guy that just got over his skis, or do you think he was just trying it on and just getting as much cash in as possible?
it was such a good learning lesson in many ways because he was both over his skis and didn't know what he was getting into, and he wasn't passionate about the space to the point where he wanted to provide a great experience. So, I mean, you'll see in the mining space, there's plenty of people who just build facilities and will host whatever you want. And we're much more of the opinion that this mining is not only a great investment vehicle and a way for people to get income and get exposure to the space, but that it's one of the most potent education vehicles. So I would have loved to have someone not only walk me through the business of mining when I was getting in, but also show me how this impacts our energy systems and can really be one of the most potent forces for good in our world today that like many other things that we deal with, is highly misunderstood and written off very quickly. So, with an engineering background, enough data center coursework, and real estate development experience, I knew that I could provide a better experience to people than what I had received. And it's the same thing with members of my team. Almost every member of my executive team had some kind of experience like the one that I just described. And they knew that this was a vehicle that was worth exploring, an investment vehicle that was worth taking a chance on. And for whatever reason, these companies don't care enough about people's experience to show up in that way and to really be like a traditional asset manager and really, care for these people's livelihoods and investments in the way that you would expect hundreds of thousands or a few $1 million worth of equipment to be cared for. So, and it's not just an old story. It's not like in the past, right? People still have plenty of these experiences today. And it's amazing to me that this industry can be Bitcoin's 15 years old, mining is maybe 8 years old as an industry where people co-locate, that we can still have these kinds of experiences be so commonplace. So it's in a sense, we built it to scratch our own itch and make sure that this didn't happen to us. But in a larger sense, I think this is one of the coolest investment vehicles that most people are going to have some kind of exposure to in the future. And if you can be the leader, the one who shows them how great it can be, and alongside that teaches them something, you will become very valuable to people.
Yeah, for sure. So why real estate then when you left college?
Uh, Family background was definitely an influence. So my parents were both real estate investors outside of their primary business. My older sisters as well. And I, like many people, just saw it as the most reliable and surefire way to build wealth. So I have personal aspirations to get to a net worth of $1 billion. That was, of course, a goal that I set when $1 billion meant something different and wasn't quite as quickly eroding. But I've always been looking at how I could create outsized value. And real estate seemed like if you mastered that, that is where most of the wealth in the world lives. That is how most of the wealthiest people in the world uh, gain their wealth if it's not through building and selling a company. So I thought of it as the most reliable vehicle to get to those aims. And I'm grateful for the events of 2020 because without seeing such a crazy influx of new money into the supply and seeing what that did to real estate markets and seeing how it's essentially just built on a foundation of debt, I may not have realized how much of the quote value of real estate is really just backed by increasing leverage every year.
What so 2020 happens and you're thinking, yeah, what, what were your thoughts? Like, okay, lockdowns, what does this mean? How do I even project where this market might go? Because we didn't know at that time how much money they were going to print. I mean, it was just absolutely insane. Uh, what was the kind of first red flag for you?
It was very strange to me that the world could shut down and that asset prices would go up so sharply. So it was a huge mental and emotional disconnect that even though the world supposedly stopped working on Main Street, Wall Street is doing just fine. Asset values are going through the roof. I was doing nothing different, and suddenly my real estate portfolio was, again, quote unquote, worth quite a bit more than it was 12 months prior. That was enough. I mean, most people won't question when they're making more money than they should be. They'll question why they're not making money. But to me, it was just odd. And I knew I had already been in Bitcoin long enough that, and I had a family background in thinking of gold as money, and thinking about sound money principles that, I knew something was off. I hadn't quite put my finger on why the world looked the way that it did. Um, but getting back into the Bitcoin space definitely kind of reignited the passion for an honest financial system. And when I first found it, it was just this interesting investment vehicle, wealth building vehicle. But as time went on, I realized that it was really more like a solution to a very serious problem in the world. And early on, it was a few $1 billion in market cap, it was smaller than most companies in the S&P. By the time 2020 rolled around, it was a global scale asset, even if it was kind of small on the world stage. And I could finally see what this could be in the context of the world financial system. And that was the early sight as well into what it could be for the energy system. Because, in 2009, all the way up into the mid-teens, we were still just running these in warehouses. This was not a global sovereign nation scale energy resource. We're now, we're on the scale of some mid-sized countries that the network uses. So really hard to see in the early days how this would play out and impact some of the larger mechanisms for how the world works. But I think it became obvious enough in 2020 that it was to me, it was a risk off pivot. That was me taking risk off the table, selling real estate and getting into Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining.
So yeah, the question I would have right now is you mentioned Saylor, and you obviously watched him announce and saw him hit the podcast scene, listened to him. I'm sure his analogies to buying digital property were probably hitting home very hard. Uh, why not just sell the portfolio and own it all into Bitcoin? Why then complicate your life with starting a business, having to find warehouses, going, this is a lot of work. That there's a lot of decision making processes to go there. That's what took you there. It's not like sailors mining, He's just
Right,
buying the thing.
right. He's doing fiat mining, very different model.
Yeah.
But so it's a few things. I mean, you've probably heard the phrase, wherever the needs of the world and your skill set meet, that's where your purpose lies. And so I had enough of a background in kind of, let's say, mining related areas that I felt that I would have an edge. So that was one part. The other part was trading an asset like real estate, where you've got the security, believed or imagined of cash flow, and going into an asset where you don't have cash flow unless you choose to take, risk on things like Celsius or BlockFi and lend out your Bitcoin, which we've all seen how that works. Um, I was very anxious about giving up any sense of making an income. And when I realized that mining was essentially everything that I ever wanted real estate to be, which was programmatically generated income that didn't require me to get up and go into an office to create, that was very appealing to me. And I told you about the pitfalls, of course. If you're trading a counterparty free asset for a bad counterparty, that's a bad trade. But the mechanics are there. This is a system that works reliably. If you have an edge in mining, if you have a good energy source, if you either have a reliable counterparty like us, or you are your counterparty, you can to some degree assure that you're going to get Bitcoin denominated income. And if you're a really good operator, you will actually get more Bitcoin over time than if you just bought and hold.
Hmm. So how did it start? You've got to, there's things to put in place here. You have the brain wave, like, okay, I'm going to start Bitcoin mining. Yeah. Where do you source the equipment? Where do you find the warehouse? Where do you find the team? Like, this is a huge operation to go through. And what age were you at this time?
At the time that I was starting, it was about 25, 26.
That's because I can see you're very young. And, you've got to attract people to come and work for you. And a lot of people would be skeptical of a 25-year-old dude that says, yeah, we're going to start Bitcoin mining. You know, you got you've got to convince people to take you seriously. What 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 were the biggest challenges at that point?
Um, honestly, the biggest challenges were just finding the right place to do it. And I'm very lucky that I had the right sequence of experiences to kind of start small. So my first facility was uh, about 13 machines worth of capacity at my electrician's shop locally. And it was way too expensive to set up. It took forever. It was my first go round setting it up for myself. So it was way over budget, way slower.
Where'd you
And
get
it's still running. Say again.
where'd you get the machines from?
Those machines I got from a vendor in Georgia. So out of my rough experience in 2021, I actually found someone who, had worked with the same guy and was a supplier and he's actually still our main supplier today for the company. And that relationship has been one of the great things that came out of that rough experience. But it's just like anything. It's just like going to your local meetups. There's a community around these things. There's a community around the mining industry. And if you spend enough time talking about it and just holding that resonance, let's say, people are going to be drawn to you that want to talk about it more with you. And I was really lucky early on to go to a conference where I met Dennis Porter. Dennis Porter is an Oregon native, so he's just a couple hours from me, and he invited me to a tour of Bitfarms in 2022. So Bitfarms, publicly traded company. They've got facilities in Canada, Washington, Paraguay, I think Argentina. And this facility in Washington, they were doing an open tour for senators and just people who wanted to see what a site looked like. So I drove up about a 6 hour drive and met someone there who is now my CTO. His name is Colin Cruz. He's been mining since 2013, had a small facility in the city where we now have our main facility. So he had about a 100 kilowatt facility where we've now got a 3 megawatt facility and growing. And it's just this wonderful sequence of events where the more you spend time on it, the more that you're passionate about it, the more that you talk about it, the more people are drawn to you who are interested in the same thing. And just because someone has been in the industry longer than you or they're older than you does not necessarily mean that they've got every piece of the puzzle. So if there's one thing that I think I have going for me, it's that I have a really strong knack for communicating a vision and communicating it with very full heart. So as big as I want this to be for myself, I think that this is worthy mission to impact our communities, our state, our nation, and the world. And so the more aligned you can be on a collective vision, the more people are going to be drawn to you to help you make that reality.
So you're in an electric shop with 13 miners, setting them all up. Uh, that must have been making an absolute racket. What were the machines?
Most of them are S19s, and they are still running a couple years later. But we're actually, thankfully, just down the street, we have a support warehouse that's about should have capacity for about 100 machines, which is going to be our smallest facility. But at least we can get them out of my electrician's hair, and they can stop making that whirring noise 24/7 for he and his employees. But I'm super grateful to he and his team, and they taught me so much. And one of the things that I was made very clear working with him is that even if you've built data centers before, which he has, we've got a 600 megawatt Facebook data center just up the road from me, which he was part of working on. Even if you've built those large scale traditional data centers, does not necessarily mean that you understand mining because it's a very different set of requirements. And there were so many times early on where, he would suggest a piece of equipment that we needed or a piece of infrastructure. And I was like, no, 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 you don't understand. This is not the same kind of project that you've been working on. If we do that, we'll never, ever make our money back. You have to be the most optimized value engineer that you can be with this. This is not high margin AI co-location. You have to be very smart about where you spend money, and you don't need all of the things that these other types of facilities need. It's part of why Bitcoin mining is so beautiful, so that it can go so many places and do so many things that other data centers can't.
Is there a is there a case to have in some of these data centers, like you mentioned the Facebook one there, to have 10, 15 Bitcoin miners in there?
It's just a question of highest and best use. So in most data centers, like just for reference, when you're building a Bitcoin mining facility, depending on how intense your infrastructure is, if you're building the energy with it, you'll usually spend somewhere between 200,000 and a million per megawatt to develop one of these facilities. If you're building a traditional data center like Facebook would, you're likely spending more like 10 million per megawatt. So somewhere between 2 and 10% of the cost to build a Bitcoin mining facility. So if you've just spent 10x on your infrastructure and you're going to take your margins down from 80 to 95% down to 20 to 30% if you're in a bear market or you're doing co-location, that's not a great trade. It's not a good return on assets. So it usually doesn't make sense for them. Where it does make sense is if they're building, let's say, 200 megawatts of capacity and they want to try to optimize their energy resources, maybe they'll do 100 as AI and high performance compute and 100 as Bitcoin mining. That 100 that's Bitcoin mining can actually be an energy management resource for the community. But they need to know that going in because if you overspend on the infrastructure, you're never going to break even on that investment.
There's so much here, right? How many of these data centers around the world that are, are, are being run incorrectly? I'm trying to like put my finger on what my where my thought process is going right now. I'm sure there's a lot of wasted energy, wasted opportunity going on inside these huge co-location AI data centers, right? Because we know how the broken money works, how the incentives work. And if the incentives are flowing towards that thing, there's going to be huge opportunities there. Is it just a matter of time before they catch on to think about implementing, like you said, a good amount of Bitcoin miners in there to offset, uh, gaping holes in their profit and loss?
So it can be, I mean, it can be a good trick for utilization. And, same with you. I have this problem where there's 1,000 different directions we could go with this, and we could talk for 10 hours about any single point. Um, but most data centers at this point have realized that they have to become energy companies. So it wasn't totally obvious, I don't think, for the last decade. But as you're seeing with things like Microsoft reviving Three Mile Island and acquiring that just to run their own facilities, and then Facebook hiring, a whole team of nuclear engineers to go out and build nuclear facilities for them, there's this realization that data centers and energy are well, data center companies have to be energy companies. It's a core competency. If you don't have a good handle on energy, you're missing out on margin. You might get out competed. And Bitcoin miners have known this from the beginning because we're so dependent on input costs and energy costs
But
to be
the incentives are true in Bitcoin.
exactly,
Very
exactly. And we
obvious from
don't.
the very beginning, like cheap energy, and that was the incentive. Go and find the cheapest energy, at,
Right.
and that's what led us to stranded energy sources and the great stories that we have of people using the flared methane gas, which Upstream Data have done a great job of doing and showcasing. Whereas these other guys, yeah, they didn't have that incentive. Fiat money was pushing them in a different direction. It's nice. Sorry, I interrupted just
No,
because
you're
I'm out
good.
of my
It's
comfort zone here. So, the epiphanies are dropping.
if you have 95% margins and it goes down to 90% in the traditional data center world because you paid too much for energy, that's not a big deal. But in mining, if you've got, 5 cent electricity and it goes up to 10 cent electricity, You don't have 95 to 90% margins. You have, 30% to zero overnight. So you are much more conscious of that input cost than someone who's selling colocation space to, say, Netflix or AI or some other kind of hyperscaler user. They're just much less cost sensitive. And it leads you to focus on very different things. And thankfully, we have the flexibility, like you said, to go on flares and landfills and micro hydro and micro solar. We can be interrupted. We don't have to be up 100% of the time, so we can fit in all of these different cases that are totally different. And instead of being a drain on local energy resources, a great example of this would be Data Center Alley in Virginia. Most of the data centers in the US, I won't say most, but a huge concentration of the data centers in the US are somewhere around Washington, D.C. and Virginia. And they have driven up costs of energy for the people who live in those communities because they are a price insensitive buyer. They need to be up 100% of the time. They need constant connectivity. And Bitcoin miners are completely the opposite. We are so price sensitive. We need to optimize energy procurement however we can. We don't need to be up all the time, so we can actually give back energy capacity to the grid when we don't need it, or it's too expensive, or it's a benefit to the community. And to me, that's the untold story. That's the biggest misunderstanding is that by using energy in this way, we'll use more energy. We'll just use it more intelligently, and we can actually lower the cost of energy for the communities that we locate in. And that's something that can't be said about other types of data centers.
For sure. And why are these other, I've not seen in the news, Netflix is boiling the oceans, or Facebook or Google, who are running these, huge operations, far greater than, a Bitcoin mining operation. But of course, all of the FUD just lands straight on Bitcoin.
What's funny is I'm forgetting what the company is. It might be Google. But there's actually a data center in Finland, in the Gulf of Finland, that they run their hydro cooling into the ocean. So they are literally cooling their data center in the ocean and quote boiling the oceans. I haven't seen a Bitcoin miner do that yet. Um, but I think the reason is just incentives, right? Nobody wants their Netflix turned off. Nobody wants to wait 10 minutes for a Google search. They want it to happen now. So if the green movement or the environmental movement comes after something that you personally want to use, you're going to be very resistant to ever letting that happen. Whereas if you're not a Bitcoin user, if you're not constantly living on the network and sending transactions, if that's not your monetary system, you're more than happy to tell people to stop using it and that it's doing bad. Um, Obviously, this is its own rabbit hole, but there's plenty of entrenched interests that don't want to see Bitcoin succeed. And so whatever they can do to put some kind of existential curse on Bitcoin because of what it does to the environment, they will do. And thankfully, peer-reviewed research says that they're absolutely wrong and that it's one of the best resources that we have for keeping the planet healthy.
hmm Is that a rabbit hole you want to go down?
I'd love to.
Those people that have, a a healthy interest in Bitcoin failing, who would you lay the blame at the feet of there?
I would put organizations like World Economic Forum, Bank of International Settlements, International Monetary Fund, these transnational organizations that have benefited from ever increasing levels of unpayable debt to countries that have no other option, that something that solves that is a very dangerous proposition to their whole business model. And it is a business.
Oh yeah, it totally is. And you know, I've shilled this book so many times, The Secrets of the Federal Reserve by Eustace Mullins. A lot of people have read The Creature from Jekyll Island by
Mhm.
Edward Griffin, which is a great book as well. It's incredible. But Mullins' book was written back in 48. So he was a lot closer to what had been going on. And he was doing the deep dive work and studying at the at the library, the National Congressional Library. I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but he was getting the minutes from the meetings of Congress during the period between 1910 to 1913. So we had the meeting in 1910 on Jekyll Island, then the 3-year Dog and Pony Show to try and get everybody on board and accept this bill that was coming. And he has minutes from those meetings, and you can just read all of this stuff as if you were a fly on the wall. And it's very evident that, yeah, there was a very strong pull and push from a few select individuals with a very strong interest in getting this bill through, and for the reasons that you just described.
It's funny if you try to read history, try not to read history like a textbook, but like a mystery thriller that's still unfolding, and it aligns much more closely. It really is, in my opinion, to some degree, this ongoing conflict between good and evil. And I was very resistant to that idea. I was much more, dismissive. Um, my grandparents would talk about this. My parents would talk about this. I just wanted to see the world as working just fine. And it took, you know, many different experiences and many different books kind of shedding a little bit more light on, let's just say, how the world actually works to realize that no, it's quite serious, and it's been going on as this kind of undercurrent of conflict for um, at least 100, if not quite a bit longer in terms of years, where there's a strong interest to centralize power and to keep people under control and to not allow there to be any sort of exit doors from a system that is under centralized control. And when I first read, like Sovereign Individual is a great example, getting through a book like that essentially predicted Bitcoin 10 years prior and had all of these different references to technologies that we would see play out just based on incentive structures and based on the structure of how people interact with one another and how they essentially the incentives for how they cooperate or don't cooperate was very enlightening to me. The scenery changes, the technology changes, but human nature is quite constant through history. So if you can just grok that, you can see a lot deeper into how your world works.
So it's funny what you said here. It's just the beginning of what you said about treating it like a detective story. I think was that the words you
Yeah.
used. I'm just going to read directly from the foreword of The Secrets of the Federal Reserve. So this is Eustace Mullins in 1949 here. So yeah, I had the year off by the date off by a year. I had no interest in money or banking as a subject because I was working on a novel. Pound, Ezra Pound, who he was going to for mentorship, Pound offered to supplement my income by $10 a week for a few weeks. My initial research revealed evidence of an international banking group which had secretly planned the writing of the Federal Reserve Act and Congress enactment of the plan into law. These findings confirmed what Pound had long suspected. He said, "You must work on it as a detective story." That is exactly what this book is. This is how he went into it as a detective. And that's why he was in the library trawling through all of those minutes. And the best thing about like his timing was perfect because it just so happened that the guys that were on the island, 1910, by the time we get around to 1949, 1950, their autobiographies are being written. And the truth is coming out because they couldn't hold their tongues anymore, right? They wanted to be known as part of that founding team and have their little stamp on that, because it had been such a resounding success in certain circles. Certainly, nobody was feeling the pinch that we're feeling right now after the formation of this. But I mean, they hadn't tied the fact that Federal Reserve Act gets pushed through Christmas 1913, and then we're at World War by the middle of 1914, right? That dot hadn't been connected. So yeah. Anyway, I'm shilling the book again. If nobody's read it,
I
go
think
ahead.
it's, I mean, as a younger guy, I'm well aware of the folly of younger people to overlook or kind of dismiss people that have come before us, whether it's your parents, your grandparents, or just people from a time gone by. We're very arrogant in the sense that we think that we're the most advanced that we've ever been. But even in mining, I'm called back to people like Henry Ford and Nikola Tesla, who, 50 years before anything like software or the internet existed, were talking about energy currencies that would stop wars and end conflict and actually, tie the world's economic system to this foundational layer of energy and computing and this distributed ledger. And it's just wild to me that, so much of studying history is not necessarily about uncovering something new as you move forward in time, but of remembering things that people have already talked about in the past and seeing how they map onto your current reality.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I love this space so much because you learn so much from different people of all ages. Here I am as a 48-year-old guy, feel as though I'm 13 and learning all the time, especially through these podcasts. You have so many, and going to the conferences and meeting people in real life, you just get so many different experiences. You can't switch learning off. And it's been an incredible journey. All right, so mining. We're back to mining. The biggest story of 2024 has been, and you pointed out at the beginning. You asked if that was an ordinal when I showed you the block of pyrite. We've had the what would be called the spam wars or the rise of monetary maximalism, perhaps. We have ocean mining out there, beating the drum. I support their message, I must say. For me, I'm much more aligned with the idea of, let's just track the money and use this as a ledger to track transactions before we get carried away and just drop all of this other nonsense in. Where, how did that start affecting your thinking around this subject? Where were you kind of falling on the argument, and how did it affect you? Okay, so let's work through this. The knee jerk kind of trope when this all started happening was it's just good for miners, bro. Just let them pay the fees. They'll get wrecked, and it's good for miners. Miners don't care. Is that accurate?
So I'm somewhere in the middle on this. I mean, obviously, incentives will guide behavior. So if you're a miner, it's hard to argue with getting, 15, 20, maybe even 100% more income from fees generated from this. I don't necessarily agree with the value of what is being put on chain and what people are paying to put on chain. But again, if somebody's going to pay you to put it into the block, I'm not against taking that payment. And at some point, it runs out, right? There's only so much real money that can be used for doing useless things. And so I don't think that it becomes a problem long term. What I will say is that Bitcoin, I was not a Bitcoin only guy for a long time. It took until 2021 for me to sell everything else and be a Bitcoin only guy. So in those early years, I was very interested in Ethereum for the purpose of being able to do these kind of non-standard transactions, process these different kinds of data. And I know that there's some differences, but it was actually to me a positive development that I could now say anything that some other chain can do, whether it's on the base chain or through some kind of layer two interaction, Bitcoin can also do. So to me, that was just an argument that, yeah, you don't need to pay attention to really anything else in the quote crypto sphere, because what people made fun of Bitcoin for not being able to do for years and calling it, slow and boomer coin or whatever the nomenclature would have been, because all it could do was process transactions and do so very slowly. suddenly now you're able to do whatever you want, and there's no more argument for putting anything else on any other chain. So while I totally agree that the main use case for Bitcoin should be money and that the most important use case is money, I don't think that anything that's truly valueless will live on the chain as time goes on. And I think it will just be expensive and a losing proposition for people to do anything like that far into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the one of the most recent blocks, and you have all of these transactions in there that so the amount that was being transacted, 546 sats, and the fee 1,520 sats. I mean, what this is the kind of nonsense that it was clogging up the mempool. I mean, now the mempool is pretty empty with five, four, what's the average at 10 sats, 7 sats, the next one, five, yeah. But the worrying time was when it just spiked and it was crazy. And all of this was deemed to be a fad and they would all go away. Uh, but at the same time, I think the worry was real and still is real that it just bloats the UTXO set, and it's
Mhm.
going to hinder people running a full node if this were to carry on and wait for that initial block download to take so long because it's just downloading all of this nonsensical data.
That's so true. Now, I will say it seems like the ability to store is outpacing the storage of useless crap on the chain. So I'm less concerned about that. Um, and then on the UTXO side, it took me a while to come around to the idea that not everybody would have, a base chain address and an actual UTXO set. But I'm definitely coming around to the idea that if this is scaling to the entire world, which is what we all hope that it will do and expect it will do, that it's very unlikely for most people to have their own UTXO set. And they're much more likely to interact with it through something like Fedi or Lightning, one of these, well created, well engineered layer twos that have a similar design to the base chain, but don't have the same fee structure. So I'm personally really bullish on expanding to layer two and that being the on ramp for most people. Because as you said, when we're in a bull market or the mempool is clogged, it's really tough to get daily transactions through and for it to make sense to use in that sense. It's much more likely that large amounts of money, very, you know, well compiled groups of settlements will happen on the base chain, and that most daily activity, like swiping for a coffee or your daily transactions, are going to be on some kind of layer two. And as long as it's a well engineered layer two and it's got a similar distributed nature, I don't see that as an issue.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm just trying to think again, like 5, 10, 15 years out, perhaps even longer, 30, 40, 50 years out, like you say. Uh, will people be looking at the base layer as the savings layer, and then the layer two, three, four above that are the medium of exchange layers? And that that's where the spam would get attracted to. There's always
Mhm.
going to be these morons coming in and trying to, scam people into, well, scam people out of their Bitcoin, right? That's basically all they're trying to do. Is they're trying to make something look really interesting and really fun and really unique and put a load of marketing, fiat marketing dollars behind it, to shake you out of your Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And that's just the sad reality. And again, that's what you said earlier about technology changes, but human behavior doesn't.
I would say the phrase nature is healing is good to use here, that this can go on for a period of time, but ultimately, if it doesn't provide any value, if it's truly a waste of energy, the natural world hates waste and it hates a vacuum of usefulness. So if there's truly no value to anything that's being put on there long term, it will just get competed out. And it may not be in the next year, it may not be in the next 10 years, but if this is the world's time and value chain, and it costs you a significant amount of money to interact with the base layer, people are not going to waste their energy on trying to move something that has no value on that base layer. There will always be scammers and grifters, but they will gravitate to wherever it's most frictionless for them to do what they do.
Yeah, and it was an awesome job from the guys actually to call all of this out. I wasn't aware of what was going on until Mechanic came on the show. We did a Spaces back in January of this year, and he just laid it out. I heard him on Preston's show, basically ringing the alarm bell, like saying, "Guys, like wake up, this thing's going on." And there's a website people can go and check out called "What the Fuck Happened in February 2023." Where this really all started to start kicking off. It's great. You got to go see it. And also then did a podcast with Giacomo and Mechanic doing a much deeper dive into it. This is what I love about like this whole sphere. They saw bad actors and they raised the alarm. They had to fight through a hell of a lot of shit because the bad actors, like I said, they're well funded. There's
Mhm.
lots of money at stake here, and they've got fiat money to burn, and they can just hire whoever they want to, fight this narrative and to insert themselves and get these tropes out there, like infiltrate certain groups and groupthink because they know how humans work.
Right.
So it's certainly one of the biggest stories, if not the biggest story of 2024, I think, in Bitcoin.
Thankfully, Bitcoin is a community with very high standards and very high standards of ethics and integrity, and they don't subscribe to bullshit by and large, which is rare in today's world. Groupthink is probably the disease that affects the most people on this earth at this point. And one of the, things that repels a lot of people, but one of the things that drew me in as deeply as anything was just that Bitcoiners really like to think for themselves. And man, there's no standard higher to be held to than either being as honest and high integrity as the network itself, or in the business world, having to live on a Bitcoin standard and choose that as your hurdle rate. Like it's very easy to go out and outperform the hurdle rate of dishonest money. But once you start denominating how you think about wealth and money in Bitcoin terms, seeking to hold that as your standard really it forces you to perform at a higher level on all levels as a human, physically, spiritually, energetically, in the competitive world of business, whatever it may be. It's setting the bar high for a different breed of person to come and show up.
Yeah, right. So we've got to start wrapping this up. What's next for Abundant Minds? What's the game plan? What's the next 5 years?
Yeah. So over the next 5 years, our goal is to be the largest energy balancing resource in the Pacific Northwest and to lower the cost of energy for everybody in the Pacific Northwest. So to do that, we've got to go from current size to 3 to 400 megawatts. That would make us essentially a plurality of energy balancing resource in the Pacific Northwest.
What did you
We've
say
been
current size was?
Current size with facilities that we've got in the pipeline and developing by the end of the year. We've got 6 operating right now and should be just under 15 by the end of the year.
And this is like fourth deck. You're bringing on another
Yeah.
nine in the next
We're
20.
building, we're acquiring. We've been in a fundraising round, probably closing that at the end of this year. And of course, price going up helps us a lot on the sales front. Unfortunately, it also means that machines get more expensive, but in terms of how the business goes, people are much more interested in mining as soon as the price starts going up and the economics get better. I mean, I've been beating the drum like nobody's business for the last 6 months. Nobody wants to look at this when it's poor economics or it's thin margins. But the reality is, on every 4-year cycle, when people are ignoring the mining space, is when you should be getting in big. So I may have a different answer if we talk again in 12 months, but I still think we're in that period where if you're allocating to mining right now, this is where you can truly outperform. And so people are now starting to come in droves, and they're coming through and buying machines and co-locating them and making good money. And this is a much more exciting space to be in than it was 3 or 4 months ago. But there's still a ton of work to do. This is a capital intensive business. It doesn't happen instantly. Price can move so much faster than we can build capacity. So we're making sure that we can build ahead of demand so that when people inevitably are interested in this, that they don't have to wait 6 months to deploy like many of the companies in our space force people to do once demand starts to pick up.
Right. So energy rebalancer, is that what you said? Was that the
The largest grid balancing resource in the Pacific Northwest.
grid balancing resource, which basically means you want to be able to make the grid a very stable and efficient provider of energy for communities all along the American Pacific West,
More reliability, lower cost, and better sources as well.
whilst mining Bitcoin for plebs and institutions and the venture capitalists that are probably backing your endeavor.
We do, I'm really happy. We have investors and customers that range from, single unit, small check to people who are putting in multiple millions of dollars on a single round. Um, and thankfully we're, set up to serve all of them. I think it makes the most sense for people that are writing checks 100K to a couple million. But we don't shut our doors to people who just want to get in with the machine. This is just as much a mission for me and my team to teach people and help them understand not just how Bitcoin works, but how the world works, how energy works, how computing works, because I think those are meta skills that are going to help them understand how the world looks 10 years from now and position them to make better decisions. So to us, an educated customer and an educated investor are much more likely to succeed. They're much more likely to keep doing business with us. So we want to equip them in any way that we can to be successful in this world that we're building.
All right, so let's drill down on the individual because that's going to be the people that are listening to the show. And if anybody's been interested in and want to learn more, what would be the process? You're global, right? Anyone can interact with this, buy a machine from
Absolutely.
you host it, right? Okay, so that's one good thing, right? So anybody listening from wherever, if
As
you
long as you're not in a sanctioned country. We can't work with
that
people.
list might be getting pretty okay.
There's a few places we can't work with, but most of the world, yes, we can work with.
Okay, so bricks on watch, right? In that case, a pleb wants to buy a machine from you, have you host it, have them be paid out daily. What's that look like? What's the process?
So the easiest way to get right into it is just go to the website abundantminds.com and you can book a consult call with one of our mining experts. You can also message us on Instagram or X, at LinkedIn as well. That's going to be at Abundant Minds as the handle. We also, for anybody listening to this, we're coming up at the end of the year, so tax planning is top of mind for people. So if you'd like to get a free tax plan, obviously we're not CPAs, but we can just show you what we've done for ourselves. I think mining is one of those unique vehicles where you can get into Bitcoin and have a little bit of a tax advantage as well, especially if you're on U.S. tax code. It's very easy for us to speak to that. So if you just message us the word offset, OFFSET, we'll send you that tax plan. And then you can also just message the word passive and we'll set you up with a consult call. But if people want to get started, entry prices are anywhere from 6 grand to I think our most expensive machine at this time is about 10K. We get you started within a couple weeks of signing up.
Okay, and the machines range from what?
The machines themselves, we don't do anything that's super low efficiency. We want to make sure that people have a buffer. So at the lowest end, about $6,000 for a machine right now, and those prices, at the time someone listens to this, might be completely different because they change with the price of Bitcoin. And then the top about $10,000 right now.
And they're all S19s.
Those are S21 series.
Wow. Okay. All right.
And probably by the time this comes out, there will be an S23 or something,
Yeah.
something else that's hit the market.
It's a fast moving business for sure. And then does the person that what pools you use, do they have any like say in that, or is it just buy the machine, then it gets hosted and you guys carry on to the rest?
Yeah, so you can think of us as literally just an IT services company. So we're setting up the machine for you and we are managing it and making sure that it runs well. But when it comes to selecting your pool or choosing your payout frequency, that is totally your sovereign ability to choose. So obviously we have people that we use and we recommend and are well equipped to help you with. But if someone wants to work with Ocean, if they want to work with Luxor, whatever pool I've never heard of, because there's a lot of them nowadays, it's we really do believe in sovereignty and the ability to make your own choice. So that is totally up to the customer.
Is there anything else am I missing here? Like we've gone the price you can accept globally, style of machine, you have pool choice. Anything
You know,
else?
we will take payment in USD and Bitcoin, but if history is any guide, I would tell you to spend in fiat and save in Bitcoin. Obviously, this doesn't mean anything if you nominate your life in Bitcoin because one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. But historically, we're in that period where you should be holding on to coin as much as you can. If you do get into mining, selling your coin to pay for your electricity, I think is not the best move. I think you should treat it like a fiat to Bitcoin dollar cost average, where you're just paying your electric bill out of some kind of working capital, some kind of reserve account. It's one of the reasons that I think our clients have been successful, and we've had very few people, actually nobody, turn off their machines over the last 6 months, is because they were educated enough to know that this is the point in the cycle where you don't want to be letting go of your coin for paying your electricity. You really want to be holding on to that. And it's going to provide you quite a bit of optionality over the next 12-month period if history is any guide.
Yeah, I'm sitting here looking at my Bitax, which I need to reflash and get that up and running and plugged back in again. Yeah, that's real pleb stuff.
We
Uh,
One of my proudest moments as a business owner was getting some Abundant Minds branded bid axes that we have been giving away. If you're following us on X, we've been doing a giveaway with Ben Jessman, the Bitcoin wine guy, for
yeah.
people that follow those accounts and get on the email list. Someone for the next 3 weeks, every week, we have three more bid axes and bottles of wine to send.
How did I enter? Just follow.
They enter by following us on X, following Ben Jessman on X, and then submitting a Google form with their email address, and then they're automatically entered. Two people have already gotten them. They've already been shipped out, so three more to go, and that should finish the week before Christmas.
Excellent work, mate. Love it. Supporting the plebs as well. I love the BidX project. I've got to get those guys on because yeah, it's such a great thing and it's such a great learning experience. My son sits down with me, like he watches it. I've got a son and three daughters, and guess who's interested in the BidX, right? I mean, you can't
You know,
change behavior.
Mining is this thing, and Bitcoin too, where if you don't physically handle the machine, it's all concept to you. It's this sort of disconnected, ethereal, just thing that you don't really get to touch and interact with. And I love the Bitaxe because it makes it where people can actually touch and feel and kind of see this thing working in real time. It definitely connects them to a sense of actually being a part of the network rather than it just being this, you know, digital ones and zeros that they never get to see and interact with in their real life. Helps bring it home.
Last question. If you had one last orange pill left to give to somebody, who would you give it to and why?
That's a really tough question. I think I'd probably give it to my oldest sister. I've got mother's on board, middle sister is on board. They get it. They've been involved, and just by virtue of family being involved, you're kind of involved. But I would really love for her and the new nephew to have a foundation built on the greatest money the world has ever seen. So that would be my personal orange pill to give right now.
Love it, mate. And thank you so much for coming on. Like I said at the beginning, hadn't heard of you, so now I know all about you, know all about Abundant Minds. So will the plebs that tune in and listen to this one, and I hope they reach out. And do you guys? Last question, because plebs are always asking me about this. Are there any Bitcoin jobs out there? Will you guys be hiring, do you think, in 2025, and for what kind of roles, if so?
Yeah, so we've been hiring pretty aggressively over the last few months, especially with, a fundraising round and this really aggressive growth path. We're currently about 13 team members. We were six only 3 or 4 months ago, and we're probably going to be 25 by spring or so. So, especially for, on the ground operations roles in Oregon, that's going to be a huge part of it. But really, if you're interested in working in a Bitcoin company, even if it's not us, hopefully we know someone who's also expanding and we can help out. But definitely reach out. If you're in our world and in our orbit and we've gotten to know you, you're obviously going to be top of the heap, and we're going to have a much better sense of who you are and how you might fit than someone who's just sending in a resume when we first think of a position to open.
Excellent, mate. Well, yeah. Anybody listening, if you've got itchy feet to get out of your fiat role, then head over to Abundant Minds, get hold of Beau, and you never know. You just got to lean in, right? Lean into this opportunity and to this network, and yeah, the plebs have got you. Well, thanks for coming on. Great to meet you, and yeah, I look forward to meeting you in person one day.
Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate you and appreciate your time. Thanks for letting me speak to your audience.
Thanks, mate. Bye bye.